Hi, Laila. Welcome to Mindvalley, and I'll give you a little introduction, and then we'll talk about your book, which just came out, quite recently came out. Takedown is the short name of the book. A longer name is actually about taking down Pornhub. Well, it's not the official name. The longer name explains that it is about taking down Pornhub. Laila is a founder and CEO of Justice Defense Fund, and also the founder of the Traffickinghub movement. You also started the petition to take down Pornhub, and as far as I know, it has gathered 2.3 million signatures already by now. I believe that the number is growing very fast, especially now. Laila is also a person who has dedicated actually decades to fighting trafficking, sex trafficking specifically, and is considered an expert in that, in that field. You have also spoken as an expert, as far as I know, on pretty much every major media, whether it's TV or printed media. And now you're the author of the book, so welcome to Mindvalley and to our book club interviews. So, Laila, did I leave something important out of this?
No, I think you covered it. Thank you so much for having me. It's a real honor to be able to speak with you and your audience.
Thank you for joining us. And, I want to start. So for people who haven't read the book, I did send a link to the book in the invitation to this interview. So I do encourage you to go and get the book. But if you haven't read the book, it is a fairly detailed account of the process of how Laila discovered, what Pornhub actually is allowing or permitting on their website, and the process of getting to the point where it is now under investigation officially. But as far as I understand, the process is not finished and there is still a journey to go. Now, I do want to talk a little bit about what you will find in the book, but as ever, I suggest you read it because it's really engaging. Not a pleasant read, you must be warned, but it is an engaging read and you will be hooked to the end. But I also want to use a chance, I hope, to get to know the woman behind the book and behind this crazy. I wouldn't call it adventure, but it is sometimes like a movie. So, first of all, how did you get into this topic? If you don't mind sharing a little bit of your personal story.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it really started many, many years ago, even growing up as a young girl in a family where my father was a huge mentor to me. And he grew up in the midst of war in the Middle East. And before he came to the United States and went to medical school and became a doctor, a surgeon. But he always stayed very connected to the plight of oppressed groups around the world. He was very interested in human rights. So he really instilled that into me and my sisters from a young age. We would watch documentaries and the news, and we were always having these deep conversations about these kinds of subjects. That's how I bonded the most with my dad growing up. And it really stuck with me. And it was credited to him that I was introduced to this subject matter to begin with, because there was one day, and I think it was in 2005, around that time, when he was watching a documentary about child sex trafficking in Calcutta, India. And he called me to the living room to watch it with him. And I saw this for the first time, this issue of sex trafficking, of people who are being held, raped for money. And this was about children. And I thought it was the most horrifying thing that, could ever happen to somebody. And it really gripped me. And I began to investigate, study, and it just set me on a journey from that point forward. And I never stopped. I kept focusing on this issue. And, over 10 years ago, I started to really notice that there was a trend where sex trafficking wasn't just happening offline, in the dark alleys and the brothels and the places where you would imagine, but it's being filmed and then uploaded online, monetized online, and living in perpetuity online. And so I began to pay attention to what was happening online. Specifically, I started to investigate what I call the big porn industry. You have big tobacco, you have big pharma, you also have big porn. And most notably is Pornhub, the most popular porn site in the world, and its parent company. So when I started to see headlines about, children being exploited, women being abused on the site, criminally abused on the site at the end of 2019, it really started to grab my attention. And that's kind of how I started to dive deeper into what was happening on Pornhub specifically.
So I have to confess that I wasn't very much aware of the topic. I mean, I'm aware of the problem, but diving deep into the topic happened when I started reading a book. For people who haven't read it, can you specify what is meant by the word sex trafficking? Because very often trafficking implies some kind of movement, but in the book it's very clear that there is well, sex trafficking is something very different from, let's say, trafficking of goods or drugs or something like that.
Right. Yeah, that's a great, sometimes people watch a movie like Taken or some kind of Hollywood representations of trafficking, and they imagine where it's somebody that ends up being kidnapped in one country and taken to another country and held hostage and sold. And that can be what trafficking looks like sometimes. But a definition is both domestic, international. Basically, it's civilization of non-consensual, if it's an adult, it's sex that was induced by force, fraud, or coercion, or it's a sex act, a commercial sex act that involves a minor. So anybody that's under the age of 18, if they're involved in a commercial sex act, sex for profit or for something of value, that constitutes sex trafficking. Now, on the sites like Pornhub, every video is monetized. It is free porn, but it exists to make a lot of money for the website and for its parent company. For example, Pornhub is selling 4.6 billion ad impressions on that content every day. So every video is highly monetized in different ways, but primarily by advertisements. So every video on Pornhub is a commercial video. Therefore, every minor that's involved in those videos, or every adult that it's non-consensual, so is force, fraud, or coercion, is a trafficking victim. So it's a little bit different of an expression than you might typically think of when you think of trafficking, but by all means, it does constitute trafficking.
So, a question I was thinking about, if we talk about sex violence or rape or children and sex or sex trafficking, it's probably a very huge and overwhelming kind of monster, and sex or profiting from it online is just a new phenomenon which is added to that. Well, that monstrosity that has been happening probably for generations of humankind. So, why are you focused specifically on sex trafficking, which is happening online, and how does that make the problem of sex violence worse?
Well, from a victim's perspective, it's one thing when you have the abuse happen.
Yeah.
But when it's filmed and then it's uploaded online, what happens is victims call it the immortalization of their trauma, where these videos end up being globally distributed on Pornhub, for example. They had, at the height of Pornhub in 2020, they had 170 million visitors per day. And they had the opportunity to download, screen record onto their devices the worst trauma that these victims experience, and then possess it. And then they can upload it again and again and again, not only on Pornhub and its sister websites, because MindGeek is the parent company of Pornhub, and they own a virtual monopoly on the global porn industry. So when we talk about the porn tube sites, these are the YouTubes of porn. They not only own Pornhub, but YouPorn and RedTube and Tube8 and XTube and GayTube and so many of these tubes. And so they could get uploaded again and again on these sites. And, victims say, it's just a terror for them to think that at any moment, their worst moment of their life could be uploaded. And then it's like this sadistic game of whack-a-mole where they have to try to keep, trying to get these videos down for the rest of their lives. And surveys have shown that victims of this kind of abuse, we call it image-based sexual abuse because it's a spectrum of abuse, all the way from children who are raped to self-generated child pornography where, somebody took a video of themselves and they uploaded it online, all the way to adult, non-consensual content where, maybe it was recorded consensually with a partner, but then they uploaded it online against the person's will that's in the video, to adult rape and trafficking. So it's like the spectrum of abuse. But victims of this kind of abuse, they have nearly a 50% suicidal ideation rate, where they think, going through this process of having to have their trauma online for profit and pleasure, that it's, sometimes they think it's better not to have to be alive than to face that.
Mhm.
So I would say, like, what's happening online is just, multiplying and compounding the harm and the trauma, and then, just making it an impossible situation for victims to be able to overcome the
Mhm.
trauma, because it's almost like you have to keep ripping that wound open again and again and again as these videos continue to be uploaded online.
Mhm. So I want to go a little bit deeper into understanding how you, well, survived this whole thing. But before that, if you don't mind to give, I know the book is fairly detailed and it's a long story, but maybe a shortened version of a story. So what happened with Pornhub, with MindGig, and well, do they still exist?
Yeah. So in a nutshell, what happened was, as I mentioned before, I started to notice these headlines in late 2019. One of them particularly was very disturbing to me. It was about a 15-year-old girl from Florida who was missing for an entire year. And she was finally found when her distraught mother was tipped off by a Pornhub user that he recognized her daughter on the site. And she was found in 58 videos being raped for profit on Pornhub. There was also a 14-year-old from California who was being abused by a relative. And a classmate of hers actually recognized her on Pornhub and reported it to authorities. And then she was taken out of that situation of abuse. And then the Sunday Times, they did an investigation and they found children as young as 3 on the site, dozens of illegal videos within minutes, again, at the end of 2019. So one night I was just taking care of my colicky baby, not colicky, but sad. We had a birth complication, and he was, up in the middle of the night, and I was consoling him, and I was thinking about these stories that I was hearing in the headlines, and I had an idea, and I said, I'm going to test the upload system for myself and find out what it takes to upload a video to the world's most popular porn site. So put the baby down, took out my phone, laptop, and actually did that. And I tested it, and I found out what millions of people already knew, because at that time they had 56 million pieces of content on Pornhub in 2020, millions of videos being uploaded every year. And all it took to upload was an email address. So in under 10 minutes, anybody in the whole world with an iPhone could record a sex act and upload it online. There were no verification of ID to make sure that these are not children in the videos, no verification of consent to make sure they're not rape or trafficking victims. And I quickly realized that the site was infested with videos of real sexual crime, and that in fact, Pornhub wasn't just a porn site, it was actually a crime scene. And so I was compelled to sound the alarm on what was happening. I started the hashtag Traffickinghub online. That started to take off. I wrote an op-ed about what I had discovered, connecting the dots. That started to get lots of traction. And then I started a petition that you mentioned that started to go viral around the world, and thousands of media articles ended up being written about this. And most notably, the New York Times did a multi-month investigation and released a groundbreaking article called The Children of Pornhub that sent shockwaves around the world. We fought hard with Visa, MasterCard, and Discover to get them to cut ties, and they finally did actually cut ties with Pornhub, leaving them only with cryptocurrency as a payment option. And Pornhub ended up taking down 91% of the entire website. They went from 56 million pieces of content in 2020 to 5.2 million today. They lost all major advertisers and business partners. The CEO and the COO were forced to resign. The secret shareholder was found and exposed. And today we have hundreds of victims, nearly 300 victims, who are suing Pornhub in 25 lawsuits, including multiple class actions on behalf of tens of thousands of child victims. And lastly, I will say they were criminally charged by the US government for knowingly profiting from sex trafficking, and the company was sold as a distressed asset. So that's where
Mhm.
we are today. The fight's not over yet. They were bought by a company that's ironically called Ethical Capital Partners, and they're trying to rebrand, they're trying to whitewash what happened, the lives that have been destroyed. They're trying to kind of just get a new image. They named the parent company something else, and so the fight's not over yet. But we've come a long way. So in a
Mm.
nutshell.
So you said that they took down 90% of their videos. Does that mean that 90% of the videos were actually illegal because there was something horrible happening?
It meant that they had no idea whether there was a child in that video or not.
Oh,
So they had not verified the age or consent of the people in the videos, right? And so any single one of those videos could be a crime scene. It could be non-consensually uploaded. It could have been rape. See, the issue here is the sites are full of like the moderators when they're looking at these videos, right? And we had, through the course of all of this happening, we had insiders from the company reaching out. We had, whistleblowers, and the moderators from the company were coming forward and telling me about this process. Now, they only had 30 moderators for all of MindGeek's PornTube sites, including Pornhub. Now, compare that with Facebook's 15,000.
oh
But
wow.
even if they had 100,000 moderators, if they're not verifying agent consent, they can't tell the difference between rough sex and rape. They can't tell the difference between a 16-year-old nude body and an 18-year-old nude body. So every video on the site was a potential crime, and so much of it actually was criminal. And that's why they had to take down 91% of the whole site. But the 5.2 million videos that are left on the site today, they also were not verified. The individuals in those videos, in,
Mhm.
in a big amount of those videos, were also not verified, and they still have criminal content on the site today.
Mm. So I'll ask the last question because it's such an interesting topic. But the the perpetrators of those violent acts, any of them also got consequences of what they filmed?
Yes. Yes. I mean, in some cases, like there was a 12-year-old boy from Alabama, and he was drugged and he was overpowered and raped. In 23 of those videos that he filmed those assaults, he uploaded them to Pornhub. He entered into a profit-sharing relationship with Pornhub where they were splitting the money that was made from these pay-to-download videos of this boy. And he was sentenced. His name is Rocky Shea Franklin. He was sentenced to 40 years in prison for what he did.
Oh wow.
The 14-year-old girl from California I mentioned to you
Yeah.
previously, Palo Alto, the woman who abused her was sentenced. In many of these cases, the perpetrators actually are in prison for the abuse that they filmed and uploaded to Pornhub.
Mm. So I do, the biggest question I had as I was reading it, of course, was, what you were feeling, what you were thinking, how you were processing this very uneasy journey. So I think the first question I want to ask, and I like that you addressed it at the very end of your book about facing the giant. How did you decide to take on a site which is so massive? And you by yourself alone.
Yeah, well, it wasn't really, it happened organically, in the context of so many years in the fight against sex trafficking, in preparation, right? And that's why I was even paying attention. But it wasn't something like I said, I'm planning on February 1st, 2020 to start the Trafficking Hub campaign to take on Pornhub. That's not what it was. It was really organic, where when I discovered what was going on, and realizing the countless victims that were being abused on the site, realizing that Pornhub servers could likely be the largest repository of sexual crime in North America, um, I just had no choice but to try to sound the alarm, to try to let people know to help victims, who were coming forward. And so it definitely evolved organically in that sense. And it just grew and it grew. And so it wasn't a choice, but
Mm,
and the mission statement from the start was impossible, right? Shut
yeah.
down Pornhub and hold its executives accountable. Yeah, I mean, when you start out, you like it actually is an impossible mission statement, but it was the only one that felt appropriate for
Mm,
the massive harm that had been done. And that resonated with so many people because
mm,
people know what justice looks like. And justice doesn't look like a slap on the wrist and then they
mm,
go on their merry way. Like that is not justice. And I think especially now, if we're going to make a meaningful difference in this massive issue of trafficking, we have to have real justice. We have to have consequences in order to deter future abusers. Because without consequences, it's a risk benefit calculation for these corporations. And they just say it's worth it. It's the cost of doing business. And we just
mm.
can't let it be that way. So that,
I actually agree. A lot of the problems that you uncovered in your book, I was thinking this is a system which is flawed, which probably affects not just the online porn industry, but actually other industries as well. What baffled me is that Pornhub, and since I wasn't in that topic, I've only heard the name Pornhub, but I discovered that it was bigger than Netflix and Amazon, which is absolutely scary. Why I'm asking this question is because in Mindvalley community, a lot of people care about making the world a better place. And very often we feel that the problem that we are dealing with is bigger than us. Did you ever have, the question in the middle of the night, why me? Why am I in the middle of all of that? Why nobody else did that for you? And if so, what's your answer to that?
yeah, there was some, I'm very open and vulnerable in the book to let the reader into the dark moments when it got really hard and there was a lot of pushback and there's, when you're going after money, it can be really, you know, you can make a lot of enemies. And there were moments when I just said, this is too hard. This is too much. I don't know that I can continue doing this. But at the end of the day, I realized, I often think about when I get to the end of my life and I want to look back on what I've done. I don't want to have regret. I don't want to wish I did something that I didn't do because I was scared or because it was hard. Um, and I think that having that kind of longer term perspective when you can, kind of pull back for a moment and get out of that like moment of hardship and kind of see the bigger picture. I think that really can help keep you going. But it was definitely difficult. The thing that really helped in all this is it wasn't a one woman battle. There were so many people who came alongside me and all the victims, I mean, the victims who were raising their voices and speaking out, the whistleblowers from inside the company, the journalists, the lawmakers, the attorneys, the other advocates, like 600 organizations participated in all of this. People were taking to the streets and protesting, and it really didn't feel lonely. It felt like what it actually became, which is a movement of people from all over the world who were coming together for a common cause. I mean, even people in the porn industry, right, were some of my most helpful allies in all of this. And so it didn't feel lonely. It felt like we are doing this together. And I think that really helped. So for people at home, I think, and people listening, and if you want to take on an issue and you feel like, boy, this is such a massive injustice or a massive topic, I think that realizing that even the smallest things, they add up over time. So, when you just kind of keep at it, keep at it, keep at it, like a broken record again and again and again, and people join you, and it takes time, but over time, all of the little effort, it adds, it compounds, and then you can start to see some impact. But yeah, I really appreciate the little things. So, when people share on social media, like people discount the value of a like or a share. But when
Mhm.
that happened and a post goes viral and victims get to see it, and then they say that happened to me, and they come forward, and now they're pursuing justice in court today. Like, I don't discount any of the small things, the likes, the shares, all of that kind of thing.
Did you ever feel that your voice wasn't strong or loud enough to fight this battle?
Yeah, I mean, I was on Twitter like at the start of this, I only had a few thousand followers, and I was, essentially shouting into the wind, like, somebody who's against this behemoth of abuse. I mean, when we talk about how big Pornhub is, they were the 10th most trafficked website at the beginning of 2020. By the end of 2020, they were the 5th most trafficked website in the world, not just porn site, but website. Researchers named them the 3rd most influential tech company on global society, just beyond Facebook and Google. So you have them, and then you have like, here I am on Twitter with like a few thousand followers trying to, you know, you say what happened, and it's like, this is not going to work. But it did, because people came on board, because people started to say, oh my goodness, that's actually happening. And then they started to share. And it's like it built momentum very organically that way, to the point where then you have New York Times Pulitzer Prize winning journalists writing articles and lawsuits being filed and criminal charges being brought. But it started out so small.
Mhm.
So yeah, that's
I think if you ever decide to write another book, you should write about taking on something bigger than yourself, because I think it's absolutely fascinating. Now, what I liked about your book is that you actually bring in also some illustrations of your life, where you describe, for example, how you're playing with a child when you're seeing, a scary message coming in. And that leads to the next question that I have. So, you took on a site which was a crime scene, in your own words. It actually allowed a lot of, criminal acts to be perpetuated and immortalized there. Were you scared sometimes for your life as well? Because I know that your family did suffer from your activism a little bit. I mean, they were threatened, and what did you do with that fear? Because you still have 2 small children, and then they were even smaller.
Yeah, I think the most fear that I had was for my family and for my children. At one point, getting the threat letters in the mail where, they're listing the middle names of my children that I never disclosed before, and saying, "We're here watching you," and um, things like that. You're gonna get somebody killed, and this, and for me, you know, the as a mother, right, having 2 young children, it was probably the worst part of it was the concern about my children, where I just became more aware of where I was, and if they're outside playing, like normally I could just let them play in the front yard, where suddenly I don't want to take my eyes off of them, and just kind of living kind of in a new reality of, this isn't as safe as I thought it was before this fight began. And so there was that kind of fear to deal with, and there was, rape threats and doxing and hacking and all of this stuff that was going on. But at the end of the day, I was really encouraged by my husband, and he's a very practical person, and he would always remind me that this is mostly just intimidation. Like, they're trying to scare you, to stop you, to silence you, and don't let them win. At one point, when that letter came through, and he said, "Listen, if people wanted to actually hurt you, they're not going to send a letter about it beforehand. They're just going to do it. So this is all about just intimidation." But that added a layer of difficulty to the journey, where you're
Mhm.
not just having to deal with what victims are going through themselves, but then you have, these things that are coming at you personally in your family. So it was difficult.
Mm. So a few more experiences I want to understand. I know that when you were fighting for some of the victims, some of the accusations that you had to face were that you're just a crazed woman, and if you were the victim, you would be respected. But since you didn't suffer, what's your problem? So how did you deal with people actually thinking or doubting you, where you see that you see it's insane what you're witnessing. You're talking about that, but because it's so insane, people don't believe you, and then they will start telling you, oh no, you're the one who is crazy. How did you deal with that, and how did you manage to convince that you were not the one who was insane?
Yeah, that was a different, so there's, multiple layers to the battle. And one of them that I was surprised by is like the narrative about the fight, where one of the biggest kind of pushbacks that Pornhub was, advocating in the media and all of this was try to discredit and try to deny, right? To say that, also that the person that's saying it, me, is, like you said, like a crazy extremist who just hates sex and wants all sex off the internet and all this stuff. And so that was really surprising, and it was hard to know how to respond. But what I grabbed onto was the fact that the truth is the truth. And I love this quote: "The truth is like a lion. Let it loose, it will defend itself." And just keep letting out the truth. And no matter what they say, as they deny it, if they say I'm crazy, at the end of the day, the truth is a shining thing, and that it will prevail. And so I just kept, sticking to this idea: continue to tell the truth again and again and again. And every time you get an attack, share more truth and share more evidence, and just go harder. And I think that helped kind of overcome all of those kinds of attacks.
But on a personal level, did it ever make you feel, you're not appreciated, or maybe doubt yourself, like gaslighted by the whole society?
I mean, I never thought that I never questioned, because I knew what I saw. I knew the victims coming forward. I was hearing directly from them. I was hearing from the whistleblowers, from the insiders. But it was really, internally, it was hard to see the lies being told, and then some people believing them. Because when
Mhm.
people read the media, right, when they read
Yeah.
news stories, like they take them at face value often, right? They just read it and they believe what they read. And so for me, that was the hardest thing, was to see, people would read these false things and then believe that they were true when I knew that they weren't true. But it was, it's not like you can go one by one and convince people like actually what you read wasn't true, it was a lie. um so I think that was really hard, was to see that, sometimes people would say things on social media that about me that wasn't true, and about my intentions and motivations, and even like the whole fight, kind of just trying to deny what was actually going
Mhm.
on. But as much as it was hard for me, it was happening to the victims themselves, the ones that
Mhm.
were coming forward publicly. They were being gaslighted, they were being attacked, they were being smeared and threatened and all of that. And so, for me, as like, it's one thing for me as an advocate to go through that, but to have a victim go through that is way beyond, it's way
Mhm.
worse.
So I did want to talk about victims as well, because this is not the topic we can avoid. You did come face to face with a lot of really horrible stuff, which you fortunately don't describe too detailed in the book. But but I mean, it's imaginable. So how? And on one side, you just now said that it gave you some courage and fortitude to go on because other people were suffering more than you. But still, how did you manage to face all of that and not let it break you? Because if you are face to face with such injustice on a daily basis, it must have influenced you emotionally.
Yeah, I think one of the things that really helped was seeing the trap. I was seeing the same, uh and if I'm speaking to these victims, but at the same time, we weren't making progress. I think that would be very, um, debilitating, and but seeing that actually things were happening, that, seeing the millions of people who were signing the petition, and the journalists who were releasing these big articles, and like all the wins that were happening, I think it gave meaning. So it's pain with a purpose. Like that, what pain bearable is when it has purpose. and you see that something is actually coming to fruition from it, and where justice, you can tangibly see in real time justice beginning to be served against the perpetrators. And I think that really helped make all of this, all the dark parts of this bearable.
Hmm. So another question that I was thinking to myself is that it was a long process, as far as I understand. There must have been moments where, you did something and it didn't bring the results that you were expecting. For example, when you were dealing with credit card companies and they were slow or wouldn't respond to you. So what helped you move through those moments of desperation, maybe, when you're
Yeah.
not sure if it's even ever going to happen?
Yeah. Yeah, there was, sometimes you thought you had a victory and you actually didn't. When the credit card companies at the end of 2020, they had announced they were cutting all ties with Pornhub, and there was all these global headlines. And then I found out from an insider, a year later, I found out from Insider that 2 weeks after they made that announcement, they snuck back to Pornhub to continue processing their advertising. And just realizing how hard of a fight it was to get to that point where I thought that they had completely cut off Pornhub, and then realizing that they didn't, and thinking we have round two. How are we ever going to do this? Thankfully, it happened. We were able to get them to cut ties fully with Pornhub. But it was times like that when I just was so crushed and so discouraged and just wanted to pull my hair out and just say, how in the world are we going to do this? And at the time, even before that, like just seeing that you're giving your best effort, but you're not getting the result that you want. And some of those moments. And one thing that really helped me was this idea that at the end of my life, I feel, and this is something that I feel for myself, that my life will not be measured on whether I was successful. It will be measured on whether I was faithful.
Mm,
Faithful to those who are brought into my life to serve, to the injustice that I have been called to fight. Faithful. You can take this and you can make it, like on a personal level with your family, your work, kind of the mission that you're brought here to, the injustice that you want to fight. At the end of my life, I feel that what's really going to be important is not whether I was successful, but was I faithful? And I think that
mm,
really helped me, because being faithful to something, I know I can do. It just means you don't give up. It's like means if you say something, you do it. You have
mm,
integrity, right? Um, if you say you're going to take an action, you just do it. And that's something that's completely in your control. Success, on the other hand, is out of your control. You know
mm,
whether it's successful.
mhm. We have a little interruption, but I hope. Hello? Um,
Yes. Can you hear
oh,
me?
yes, you're back. Yeah,
Yeah. Sorry.
pretty much everything was heard. Just in the very end, there was an interruption. So it is very inspiring. It's not the success by what you are going to be judged by, but were you faithful to your cause? Um, One more question related to that. I know that when you started this journey, you didn't have the answer to the question how to fight this monstrosity. What would you tell to people who also have this cause, which is very dear to them, but they have no idea which steps to take and which way to run and what to do? Where did you find your answers?
Yeah. I think it's a matter of being consistent. And it's been a long, so it's not like all this traction that happened with Pornhub was in context of over a decade of pushing the boulder up the hill with regard to the issue of sex trafficking. And finally we get to a tipping point where that boulder starts to, like, actually go down the hill, but you're pushing, you're pushing, and you're pushing, and for years. And I think that, a lesson there for me is just like, you know, just if you're called to something, just keep at it. Like, don't give up, even when you think that you're not making any progress,
Mhm.
because year after year, going in the same direction, going the same direction, pushing that boulder, pushing it. At some point, it's going to tip. And then, but you don't know when it's going to be. So you just have to keep pushing and and believe that at some point you're going to get that momentum that you need. But that's just go through the hard and like very you know, kind of discouraging seasons and just don't give up. Take breaks, fine, take a break, you know, but keep going and don't stop.
You know, I find your backstory to that story very inspiring, and I do hope that if you decide to write a second book, it will be about, you know, the lessons in perseverance and taking on big big problems. But I do have to ask a question about this book. So a lot of your work was advocating, was talking to people, putting people together, you know, and amplifying victims' voices. Why did you decide to write a book? How does that fit in the whole picture? And how would you like the book to change the world?
Yeah, well, I wanted to have the truth on the public record. I thought, you know, like I said, the truth is so important. And I wanted this to be a tool through which people can go with me on a journey um, and experience what I experienced. It's told in first person, present tense, where you actually, I did that on purpose because I wanted it to not just be information that goes into people's head, but I want it to be an experience that goes into their heart and it impacts them emotionally. So they feel like they really got to meet the victims, that they really met the whistleblowers, that they actually saw this horrific content with me and went on this journey in such a way that by the end of the book, they can also feel the same passion that I have for ending this.
Mhm,
And so I think, you know, that's one thing to be able to deeply understand an issue, you have to you know, do it on a journey and through a story. And I know that stories are so powerful. Stories
mhm,
can change people and then people can change the world. And so I truly believe that. And so I want to see that with this book. I want it to be used as a tool, not only to help finish the job and take down Pornhub, but to help actually, you know, take down and prevent this illegal content across the internet. But more
mhm,
than that, to inspire people in their own fight. Like, you know, maybe you're not going to join me on the fight against Pornhub, but maybe you have your own giant to face. Maybe you have, you know, like addiction or past trauma or a different injustice that you're passionate about. And so my hope is that this story is inspiring and encouraging to everybody to take on whatever it is in their life that they have their giant to face.
mm. But I mean, you are still the audience. Welcome to go and sign the petition. Trafficking Hub. Is it Trafficking
Yes.
Hub dot something?
Yeah, so you can go to
Mm,
takedownbook.com and there
yeah.
you can get the book. So 100% of royalty proceeds from the book go to the Justice Defense Fund to help further the cause. And then
Mm,
you can sign the petition at that website and you can join Team Takedown. So we created Team Takedown, which is a group of dedicated individuals that are going to not only fight to continue to take the take down.
it's interrupting again, but yeah, join the Team Takedown and sign the petition. You know, of course, sex trafficking is an extreme, well, an extreme form of violence, but I think it would be good for our society as a whole to be a little bit uh, more you know, critical about the information which is out there on internet. So I think as maybe as a side effect, it will spill out not just on the internet porn, but on the internet as a whole, which is
Yeah,
becoming more and more extremist and more uh, crazy, if I can say
yeah,
so.
yeah.
So join the fight. I wanted to ask the last question, but I think the disruption slightly scared me off. You know what? I'll do the traditional closing, and maybe by the time I'm done with the traditional closing, the question will come. Ah, yes, it came. As a sex trafficking expert with a very long experience, what we ordinary people who maybe have never been to Pornhub, but exist in this world together with this horrible phenomenon, what can we do on a daily basis to actually not permit for such atrocities to happen? Is there anything that is in our hands, or it's still the domain of the people who are victims and who are activists?
No, I think what I've noticed the power of just individual action. Like I said, just the power of being able to share a post with your community on social media, your family. I have just seen how powerful that actually can be. And so I encourage people not to discount that. Follow me on social media. And if you care about this, share it, with your community and whoever's following you. Like that is actually powerful. You can even meet with your lawmakers yourself. They work for you, the citizen, the
Mm-hmm.
individual citizen. They are there to serve you. And you can come to your lawmakers and say, hey, I want you to make sure that you implement policy to verify the age and consent of every person in every video on every user-generated porn site on the internet. Like that's the goal. We want to see that as a solution to this problem. And actually, every citizen has the power to do that. And I'm encouraged. Yesterday, I got a message from somebody who read the book and they set up an appointment with their representative in their state, here, their congressman, and they had a meeting and they brought it to their attention. And now they're going to move forward and follow up on that. So, like, people can definitely do that. I encourage them to do it.
And I think there's actually much more of that of sexual violence happening that we are even aware, because a lot of the times victims are ashamed to share, and we might not even realize how much of that is happening close to us. So I'm very happy to see the movement in our contemporary society towards recognizing that sex has to be consensual. I know it sounds maybe obvious and ridiculous, but I think a lot of the women have suffered in silence for too long, for
Yeah.
generations. And I'm happy to see that we are talking about that. So the traditional closing is I want to ask people who are online to leave a heart for my guest, either by just clicking the heart or leaving it in the comments. And if you're watching it in recording, and this is the majority of you guys, leave a heart in the comments under the video. But don't just leave a heart. Go to actually sign the petition, Traffickinghub, and join the movement to make this world a safer place for girls and for boys, for everyone. Thank you,
Thank you
Laila,
so
so much.
much.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thank you for joining us, and I'll see you guys next week. Bye bye.
Bye.